In order to change the particle color, I'm actually going to go back into ice to set the particle color. What we can actually do is take attributes from ice and use them directly in the render tree using the attributes shader, as you've seen me use before. I can actually pull in a color attribute shader, and any color attribute that ice can set or get can also be manipulated in the render tree. So if we look at the color attribute, the initial color that we can set, this color attribute is accessible from the point cloud. If I was to get a get data node, use get d to find a get data node, and if I could go and explore it for, I can actually just turn off my render tree here. If I go and explore it for my point cloud, there's my cloud, and if I expand its list of attributes, one of the attributes is color. So I've already initialized that. That's kind of where the yellow is coming from right here. But if I go and change that color, I can actually use the color input, the initialization on the emit from surface compound. So to do this, I'm going to pull in a gradient node because I basically want to pull a variety of colors from a gradient. So if I go and type in the first few letters, gradient, gradients are usually available under the tool color category, and then you'll usually find your gradient tool here. There's some other turbulize and randomize gradient tools, but these are actually just variations of a gradient and then another node. So if I pull in a gradient node, gradients need a way for the color to be randomized over each of these particles. Again, I'm trying to set a color per particle, and gradients run a gamut from a position of 0 to a position of 1. So if I have a position in the middle of 0.44, I can set 3 different colors here, red, blue, and say green. That's not green. That's green. And so if I actually wanted to randomize the picking of a color from the first position to the last position, I can pull in a randomize node, like a randomize value by range. I can even copy this one, Control-C, Control-V. And if I double-click on the range I copied from, this one has a range that's well out of the range of an RGB color, or out of the position of the colors in the gradient that I want to sample from. But if I set the min-max value to 0 and 1, and of course I don't want this in an animated effect, I just want a static color for each point in the cloud, I'll plug the randomized value by range into the gradient, and then the gradient into the color. And again, I'm on frame 2, so we see those changes propagate immediately. Now if I actually just jump through, and I don't really like the distribution of these colors here, so I can just work the random seed to get a more pleasing combination that I do like, but again, I don't want clown clouds. So I'm just going to go in and double-click the gradient and change these to something that'll work a little better for me. So I'll go with some dark grays at position 1, at position 0.4. We'll go with some kind of lighter colors, and then our base position, maybe something like that. Now the problem is that we're not actually using this color in ice. We need to actually get this color attribute that we've just set and then pump that into the render tree. So if I actually jump back into the render tree and I grab my point cloud or into the materials manager, I can actually just use the render tree here. I'll refresh this. I'm going to pull in an attribute shader, and I want to use it to drive the particle's color on the particle renderer. So I'm going to pull in an attribute shader. And as I mentioned before, an attribute shader allows you to pull an attribute of the type that you bring into the render tree and use it to grab values from ice. So if I pulled in a scalar attribute value, and I can pull from a number of these attributes that live on the ice point cloud. So I don't need a scalar attribute at this time, but what I do need to do in my particle renderer is access the particle color, and I want to override the particle color. So I can actually use this color input here to drive the attribute color. Otherwise, this is just grayed out, and I don't really have access to it. So I'll override the particle color, and I'll plug into the color input, so we can see that this is now overridden. And if I double-click on the attribute color, where am I actually going to get the color from in the ice tree? Do I want to use the default value, which is this color here? So I could actually go in and kind of pick a color from here. Again, nothing's really changing because I'm actually setting the value in mental right now. But actually what I do want to use, I want to use the color attribute. So if I go and draw a render region now, you can see that our particles are now picking up that variety of colors within our gradient. So that's already starting to look a little better. I now need to actually add a little bit of variation into this volume to give a little bit more texture. So I now have a volume that's well defined, and now I'm going to go and kind of carve into it, if you will, using some texture maps or some shaper tools.